Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Joy and I are extremely happy to talk to award-winning writer and producer Karan Hall, who wrote for many celebrated TV shows, as well as MASH, Hill Street Blues, Judging Amy, and The Good Wife, just to name a few. However, Moonlighting fans know her best for writing one of the most creative and iconic episodes of the series, Big Man on Mulberry Street. She also contributed to many episodes in season 3. So welcome, Karan, and thank you so much for answering questions submitted by our members at our Facebook group, Moonlighting 21.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So,
Okay, let's jump into the first question. You joined season 3 of Moonlighting as a supervising producer and writer. Tell us how you got the job and what was your role as a supervising producer? And on your IMDb profile that you were listed as an assistant to an actor in the pilot. Could you talk a little bit about that
true.
too?
That's not
IMDb will lie to you. Yeah, it has to be a lot of things that I did not do. So I wasn't. Okay. I did not do that. So I don't know if somebody with my name did that, but it wasn't me. all I did was write and be a producer. So I got the job. Glenn, Karan, and I had the same agent, and he had kind of been after me forever to do it. And I hate to tell you, but I wasn't a huge fan of the show at first because, I wrote for MASH, and what I decided during MASH was that I didn't want to be a comedy writer because I hated that I had to come in and be funny every day. And if I was in a bad mood, I didn't want to be funny. And so I decided I wanted to do drama. So I then went to Hill Street Blues. And so, when they wanted me to go do Moonlighting, I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to do drama. And finally, they wore me down. And, by the time they hired me, I think I'd come to understand what the show was, and I became a fan of it. So, I was hired as supervising producer, and absolutely none of us knew what that meant. We were trying to make it up as we went. So a lot of times with those credits, you see a lot of producer credits, they really have to do with, like if I look at a thing and I see the credits, I know that executive producer, co-producer, supervising producer mostly tells you how long somebody's been doing it, and kind of what their status is. So I was supervising producer because I was high level. But I didn't really supervise anybody. I think that, Reno and Osborne were there when I got there. And I think that when Glenn hired me, he wasn't quite sure of how they were going to work out. They turned out to be fantastic. So not long after they hired me, they turned in the Shakespeare episode. And that episode, what they shot was basically a first draft from Jeff and Ron. Mm-hmm. Glenn might have done a few things to it, but it was pretty much, the first draft to me sounded like what they shot. And so then we were all just kind of on the same level. There was me and Ron and Jeff and Roger Director and Chick Egley. I think that was it. And we were just the writers. So, we would be in the writer's room and we would do whatever we did. And then we'd turn it into Glenn and wait for Glenn to read it and tell us what to do next. So we pretty much sat around the table all the time, except when we were writing. And the show was always behind because, Glenn was trying to do everything. And if you do everything, you can't stay current. So, and Glenn is brilliant. So, the show wouldn't have been what it was if he wasn't doing everything. But we'd end up, in the writer's room all week going, we don't have a script for next week. And Glenn says he's going to write it. And we all know he does not have time. And then we'd end up having to, we called it gangbanging it. There were four writing entities. There was me and Roger and Chick and Jeff and Ron. So we would come in, if we had to gangbang a script, we'd come in at 9:00 in the morning. And we would have a draft of the script by lunchtime because everybody had to write 15 pages. And so then we'd get together and have lunch and talk about the script. And then in the afternoon, we'd rewrite it. And everybody who was there when I was there was really good. So we could pull that off. But I haven't seen many shows where you could pull that off.
Okay, Big Man on Mulberry Street. One of the most iconic episodes of Moonlighting and one of the most beloved. Um, it's listed among the most creative of critics and fans, along with Dream Sequence Always Rings Twice and Atomic Shakespeare. When we interviewed Glenn for our fanzine in 2002, he told us that Billy Joel wrote the song for Moonlighting. How did you get assigned to write that script, and what were the ideas brainstormed to build an episode around the song?
Okay, well, I got assigned. That was the first thing I got, like the first week I got there. And Glenn handed me a tape. It was a cassette tape at the time. He handed me a tape of the song and said, play this in your car and see what comes to your mind. And and I knew we had Stanley Donen for the dance sequence. And two things. By the time, first of all, I'm from South Central Virginia. I know nothing about New York and the Village, and it's like nothing comes to my mind. I don't know this world. But when Stanley Donen got there and they started working out the dance sequence, I think that kind of told Glenn what he wanted to do. And so I had the idea for the first couple of scenes. The first scene was a scene in the restaurant. And I wanted to do the thing with the hands and going from one person's hands to another. And Glenn really liked that. And then the second scene, Glenn told me, this is one of my favorite scenes I ever wrote. It's 11 pages. And Glenn said, make them have an argument about responsibility. And that's all he told me. But I just had a ball with that scene. And to this day, I will show people that scene and go, this is what I can do. Because I absolutely loved it. And then the rest of it, we knew that he was going to go to New York to the funeral. I don't know. I think Glenn knew that he wanted David to go back to New York. So he came up with the idea of him going back to a funeral. And Glenn came up with the idea of him going back to the funeral of his brother-in-law. And we went, oh, David's been married. And so, he said, play with that. So I did. I did the scene with the pesto and them in his drawer going through his playpen. And we knew that he was going to go to New York and that Maddie was going to follow him. So I wrote everything up through the monologues. Glenn wrote Bruce's monologue and I wrote Cybill's monologue. And I wrote the scene where, the next morning she wants to go to the funeral and he won't let her. I wrote a version of that. Glenn wrote the version that shot, and it was much better than my version. But then we didn't know. A lot of times we would start shooting something. We had no idea where we're going with it. I mean, frequently. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that she was going to sneak into the wake and meet David's ex-wife. And we had absolutely no idea what we're going to do beyond that. And so Glenn came up to me in the hall and he said, I want his wife to have left him for another woman. And I did not say yippee, joy, joy, because this was 1986, whatever it was. I'm like, really? And he said, here's the thing. If we do that, then I know what the scenes are. And that made sense to me. It's like, okay, that makes much more sense. You get a button to a scene that's a plot twist. And so, I said, okay, so I wrote that. And I wrote the airplane scene, and that was pretty much it. So we kind of pieced it together as we went.
There's been a lot of speculation with the fans over the years of why Maddie flew out to New York in the middle of the night. Could you discuss the reason why that was chosen?
Yeah, the reason is Karan and Glenn thought it would be cool. That's pretty much the reason. The reason in her head was just she was freaked out about the fact that he'd been married before, and that he was going to see his ex-wife. And, it was totally impetuous. She thought she could tell him that she was there to help. But in the scene where she does her monologue, it's like, I thought this and I thought that. And really, I don't know why. It's like, here I am. Yeah. So, we could buy her doing that because we felt like the blow of him having an ex-wife was going to be really, she wasn't seeing straight at that point.
Mm-hmm. So there was like, jealousy and
I don't want him to get back together with his ex-wife, and
yeah.
I want to meet the ex-wife. I want to size up the situation. So yeah, I can see me back in my more stupid days, but
it really reveals that Maddie feels, a lot deeper for David than
and more than she thought,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like when she
that she wants to admit, to herself. And the you mentioned the twist of that his ex-wife was cheated on David with a woman instead of a man. Why do you think that David couldn't admit that to Maddie?
Are you kidding me? In 1986, and David Addison is alpha male. There's no way he would have admitted that to anybody.
Yeah,
know it, but I don't know if when you saw it was the scene of him and the cabbie in the car, was that still in it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought he had the perfect point that he said to the cabbie, which is a person in bed with your wife is a person in bed with your wife. It's like gender is not the defining characteristic. So
yeah.
But no, I think he would have felt like he was much more embarrassed to tell Maddie that she left him for another woman than, in 2025, that wouldn't have worked, but it worked in 1986.
Yeah, absolutely. Times have changed a lot.
Yes.
There were other drafts you mentioned of the script. What elements do you wish were in the final shoot?
Big Man on Mulberry Street.
Yeah.
I was really happy with how that was, and really we didn't have any drafts. I wrote the first scene, the first two scenes, first three scenes. I wrote her getting the idea in the bathtub to go and calling, and then I wrote her monologue, and then Glenn wrote his monologue, which I was grateful for because I'm not a guy. And so I didn't feel like I would know what he'd be thinking. So Glenn did that, and then and I did a version of the hotel room scene. My version was not very good. I couldn't figure out how to do it, and so Glenn rewrote it, and that really purred. And then I wrote the scene where she goes and meets the ex-wife, and I wrote the cab scene, and I wrote the airplane scene. So it just kind of all got pieced together as we went. We talked about it and fell into place.
And Adam,
I'm sorry, Joan, let me just say this. I just want to say, were you surprised with the reception of that episode? I mean, after it aired, It was like...
Yes. I had a friend who called me that night. He was somebody, he wrote for the Herald Examiner back when that was a thing. He was a critic, and he left me this like breathless message about how great it was. And I thought, he doesn't gush. So that must have been a good episode. I did not know it would end up being one of the major episodes and all of that. But, we went into it knowing it was going to have a Stanley Donen dance number. So, unless we really screwed up, it was going to be a big episode.
And out of all the scenes that you wrote for that script, what is the one that you feel that stands out the most, that you really contributed, that no other writer, really would have?
I love the responsibility scene, and it's not that nobody else could have done it, but they wouldn't have done it the same way. Because I have strong feelings about responsibility and the people who aren't responsible and the rest of us who have to make up for them. So I got to say a lot of stuff I wanted to say. I liked her monologue, but in pitching to me what it should be, Glenn gave me some really good little bits that I put in there. So, but the responsibility scene I liked the most because it was all me by myself in my office. And it was the first big scene I'd written for them. So I was really happy that it worked out.
You contributed to the episodes that introduced Mark Harmon as Sam Crawford. We call it the Sam trilogy. What do you remember about those episodes, starting with Blonde on Blonde and ending with I'm Curious, Maddie?
Very little. Part of my problem is this was a long time ago. Mark Harmon was really, really nice. We hung out with him. We did a lot of gang banging those episodes. So I don't even know at this point what I wrote and what I didn't write. But we really liked the idea of the episodes, and we really liked Mark Harmon. And I know, we just had fun with it. I remember I wrote the line, Maddie's bedroom, the final frontier, and I really liked that line. It's like, that's so what David would say. But I don't know. I liked those episodes. It kind of, for me, fell apart after in the I don't know if it's the third episode, but when she ends up in bed with Bruce, I was very against that. And I did a lot of voicing that to no avail. I just felt like once you break that sexual tension, I just don't think you have the show anymore. And Glenn felt like, it's ridiculous for it to go on this long. And yes, in 1986, they probably would have slept with each other by now, but I just felt like it hurt the show. I'm a big Gunsmoke fan, and, Matt Dillon never slept with Miss Kitty. And the show lived off of it for 24 years. But I don't know. That's one of the main things I think about those episodes.
In Maddie's Turn to Cry, David and Maddie are sitting on the chest in his apartment, and David says, "So you just left him there, huh?" Referring to Sam. Maddie says, "He's perfect for me, but you and me, and she starts to cry. And what was Maddie going to say? Because we are stumped.
Her point was going to be, if she could have talked, that she and David just didn't make any sense, on paper or anywhere else. They were complete opposites. She wanted somebody who was ambitious and had a job that reflected that. And, she just kind of had a sense of what she wanted. And this crazy guy who was goofing off at a detective agency was absolutely not what she had in mind. And he's crazy and he has no furniture and you don't know where he came from. And so, she's fallen in love with this guy and she just knows that it just makes no sense to her.
Also, in regard to that scene, why does David just let her sit there crying and not do anything to comfort her until she has a go at him? It seems strange seeing how much he loved her.
I have absolutely no idea. I saw that question and I thought, I just don't know. I'm sorry. Wish I did.
No worries. What do you think the climactic episode, pun intended, of I'm Curious, Maddie? 60 million people tuned into that night to see Maddie and David finally come together. And you've talked about this a little bit. What were the various scenarios discussed in the writer's room?
Pretty much what you saw. I was the person I was the only woman, and I'm in there going, I don't like this idea. I don't like that, it's David in bed and she thinks it's Sam, and then oops, it's David. It's like, so she was just going to sleep with whoever happened to be in bed. It's like, I just don't like it. And, I was young and strident at the time. So I threw a lot of fit, but no one cared. So the guys all liked it, and so that's what they did.
The last episode you wrote was Take a Left at the Altar in season 4. In that episode, Cybill appears in a few scenes, one of which is where she is reading a letter from David. Since the scene was filmed prior to Cybill's maternity leave, was it not a part of the original script? And also, in other words, were Cybill scenes written and filmed ahead of time, not knowing which episodes they would end up in? And then did the writers take the completed scenes and write the episodes around them? And did Glenn write Cybill's early season 4 scenes, or was he working on his movie Clean and Sober? What was happening?
I have no idea, but I came up with the idea for that episode, and I could see the the cold open really easily. And we knew that we didn't have Cybill for that episode for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know if it's her pregnancy or she was out of town. I don't know. But, we also knew that the audience did not want to see a Moonlighting without Maddie and David in it. So those were shot. Glenn wrote those, and they were shot, I can't even remember. There was one episode we shot, and Maddie and David are in a scene together, and they were never in the same state at the time we were shooting it. So I don't know if it was that, but he knew what he was going to do to lay that in, and so that's what happened.
Okay, so now I'll be continuing with the questions. So, in regards to season 4, then, what was it like writing for the majority of it, since it was so disjointed? How did it affect your writing process?
Well, I'll tell you, in terms of the rest of my career, it made me absolutely fearless, because there were so many times when, we did not have a shoot. Somebody told me they drove past where we were shooting on a Tuesday morning, and they saw the episode on Tuesday night. So our stuff was going directly into the feed with no color correction, wow. No anything. It was insane. It was totally insane. And so I found out that, if I have to, I can write a script in the time it would take me to type it. It was frustrating to me, because whenever I had to write something, I didn't have time to figure out what was the best way to do it. Because I only have time to figure out a way to do it. I'm a perfectionist, so that was frustrating to me. But it was great, because I went on to other shows, and, if they told me I had 2 weeks to write a script, I was in heaven. Everybody else was stressed. My sister and I would compare notes on what was the quickest time you got a script done in the worst circumstances. And I think I won, because I got one done in 24 hours, 9 months pregnant with a head cold. And so it was great for the rest of my career, because I was just never afraid. When I ran Judging Amy, and I was very chill around the rest of the writers, because I thought, if you mess it up, I can do it in 24 hours. So it was really great.
Yeah, I think Moonlighting pretty much prepared you for anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, it was insane. And, we knew it was insane. Everybody knew it was insane. And, Glenn said, do it anyway. So we did.
Okay. Now, were there any ideas you had for Moonlighting that did not make it to the screen and that you wish would have?
Sorry. No. Sorry.
It's okay.
As you know, I've had bronchitis for like 15 years now. I came up with the idea for Take a Left at the Altar, and I wanted to do that. And as far as I can remember, that was the only one I really came up with an idea for. That idea was just for the cold open. But
it's okay. Yeah, we know you're getting over something. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had it for 3 months. I'm really tired of it now.
Oh gosh.
I know. I have a friend we spend a lot of time together, and she has 4 grandchildren under the age of 5. And so we're both sick all the time because of that.
Passing it around.
But they're adorable.
Yeah.
No, most of the time Glenn was ahead of us in knowing what we were going to do next. So I wouldn't have come up with something. I came up with the Take a Left at the Altar because we were getting to a point that, we knew we were going to need ideas, and I had that idea for some reason.
Okay. Well, the next question, I think you did touch on it, but did you ever want to take the characters in a different direction from what Glenn ultimately wanted in an episode? Like you mentioned, you wouldn't have had them sleep together.
Just that. Yeah. And I told Glenn at the time that we found out Cybill was pregnant and he was going to write the baby in. And that was when I left, because I said, I don't see a show anymore. And at the time, I was on my first husband, and we didn't have any kids, and we were fighting about whether or not we were going to have kids. And I told Glenn, I said, I can't come in and write babies every day when this is what I'm going home to at night.
Wow.
So that's when I left, and my sister took my job. So
Yeah, that would be Barbara Hall. Okay.
yes.
Now, you wrote episodes on your own and in collaboration with the other writers. Can you describe what you felt to be the pros and cons of writing either way?
I think everybody likes writing on their own because writers don't become writers to be collaborators. So, we become writers to sit in a room by ourselves and write. But on the other hand, I really liked and respected the other writers. And so when we would gangbang a script, I was really interested in seeing what they were going to come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And, we got along really well. So we had a lot of fun. So, but most shows, you go in and the first few weeks, because we come back before the actors, and you spend the first few weeks coming up with story ideas and then going away to write them. So everybody gets to write their first episode by themselves. But everybody also knows that you're going to get farther behind as the season goes, and you're going to end up gangbanging everything. And so, I've had pretty much always had the case that I got to write the first one by myself, and then from then on I was writing with somebody.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you regret any choices made because there is no other show like Moonlighting even now?
No, it was really lightning in a bottle. And what happened was after I left, like everywhere I'd go and have a development deal, they wanted me to write Moonlighting, and it's like, guys, it's not just a matter of, a pretty woman detective and a, devil may care man detective, and they say witty things. It's like, that's not what the show was. It really was. Bruce and Cybill were really lightning in a bottle. Glenn is brilliant. So it's like, and I saw a lot of people try to make Moonlighting, but, it just wasn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, fans were not happy with the finale episode, Lunar Eclipse. If you were to have written the last episode, how would have it ended?
Well, if I had written the last episode, they wouldn't have been a couple. So maybe in the last episode, they would have become a couple. And I don't think I've even seen the last episode. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, what are some of your favorite episodes, and where does the big man rank among them?
It's hard to be objective about that one, but I would put it in the top 5 of, I don't know, best episodes, but definitely the ones people remember. I absolutely loved Atomic Shakespeare. And like I said, that was pretty much a first draft. It was shocking. I liked It's a Wonderful Life. I don't know if that's what we called it.
It's a Wonderful Job.
It's a Wonderful Job. Yeah, I like that one a lot. And I liked some of the ones that were before I was there. The black and white episode, that was before I was there, but I loved that one. I love the ones like those that were, standout episodes. There was nothing wrong with the regular episodes, but those were the ones that stuck with me and stayed in my memory.
Now, since you were there for all of season 3, how were your interactions with Bruce and Cybill? Any memorable stories to share?
I do, but most of them I'm not going to share, because I have to, not be killed. Bruce was fantastic. Because he wasn't a star yet, and he was the hardest working, and to this day, the hardest working actor I have ever seen. When we did the Big Man on Mulberry Street, he would come on his lunch hour, not being paid, to rehearse the dance sequence. And, you could go to him with anything if you had a problem or a question, or he was just fantastic. Cybill and Bruce, you probably know, were not madly in love with each other. So I tried to stay away from them being together. And I got along fine with Cybill. I got along fine with both of them, but all the writers didn't go to the set very often. I went to see the Stanley Donen dance sequence being rehearsed. And I went when Glenn wasn't there and I had to go be there. But for the most part, we didn't go to the set because we had heard that there was a lot of strife on the set and we didn't want to be in a lot of strife. So we stayed in our offices.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we would, because the what do you call them? We call them professional journals, the tabloids.
Mm-hmm.
At the time would pay people who were in the crew to tell them stuff that was going on in the stage. And so the stuff that they would print would be true because they'd paid somebody for it. So we would always, when the tabloids came out, we would go get them and we'd sit in our writers' offices and read to see what was going on the set.
Well, did you ever find out who it was, who the mole was?
No, never did. I think people had theories, but I don't remember what they were. But, you know, we read that there was furniture flying and so I said, I'm not going to the set. So, but, you know, I mean, whatever was going on, it was absolute magic on the screen.
Right. I know a lot of people find it hard to believe when the chemistry that they saw on screen that they actually did not get along. Especially in interviews and award shows.
And I think they, you know, until Bruce got sick, I think they were getting along fine. I think they made up later and were friends. Mm-hmm. But during that period of time, for whatever reason, you know, actors tend to be very volatile, especially actors that age. And so it was what it was.
Now, in the entirety of your career, what was your favorite TV writing job experience and what made it so great? And what do you think are some of your best work episodes you've written?
My favorite of all the jobs was Judging Amy, and the reason was because my sister was running it until I was, and so I got to produce my own episodes, and I could write about anything I wanted to write about, and the show really lent itself to writing about anything you wanted to write about. Because there were social worker cases and court cases, and between the two, you could find a way to write about something that interested you. The two that I liked the most, when my sister created the show and got it on the air, and she was trying to get me to come work on it, and I didn't want to, because I just had a book come out, and I really wanted to just keep writing books because that was a lot more fun. So she called me at one point and said, I know how I can get you. I want you to write the God episode. Because she knows I was a sucker for the God episode. So I wrote it, and it was called The God Thing. And it was one of my favorite things that I'd written. And then the other favorite episode of that was called The Frozen Zone, and it was a 9/11 episode. We were all, you know, we went into office on 9/12, which we shouldn't have. And everybody was insane. And, you know, people ended up throwing things at each other. And we talked about, in fact, I called another producer whose show was set in New York City going, what are you going to do? Because, you know, in the real world, this has happened. And we're pretending that we're writing the real world. So has this happened in our real world? And I remember we decided to just, Barbara said, you know, we're going to go with whatever we have already written because we're all crazy now. I don't trust anything we write. So that's what we did. And then we found out things were really resonating. We had a story about a bully and a gang in the school and how he was keeping the peace, but if they got rid of the bully, the school was going to erupt. And it really resonated with the 9/11 stuff. So for that first year, we just kind of let that happen. And I said at the time, I said, this is a legal show. So any court case that would come from 9/11, we've got a year to do it. So when it was the next year, I pitched this. I wanted to do the Frozen Zone was what they called the area that was blocked out from anybody coming to. And so I came up with an idea for a court case we could do around that. And it was really important. You know, I think it was probably important to the audience because it was cathartic, but it was important to those of us working on the show because we had been together when it happened. And then And then we got to do an episode that was cathartic. And one of the grips said to me, the grips all had tissues on their, cameras and everything. And one of them said to me, we needed that. And I thought, we really did, because we were together and we all together needed some kind of catharsis. So that was a really important episode to me.
Okay, now, and how did writing for Moonlighting compare and contrast with your other projects?
It didn't compare with anything because it was insane. Really, I mean, it was a world of its own. Every other thing I worked on, I had 2 weeks to write a script, and it just, it was its own thing, and it was crazy. And we were able to get away with murder because the ratings were so good. It's like our budgets for our episodes were unreal, but America loved the show, so Glenn got away with having unreal budgets, and got away with not doing the number that we were supposed to for the season and everything else.
Okay, now you wrote a book that was published last summer, The Sound of Silence. Anything you would like to mention about that project, about that book, or any other projects that you're working on?
That project, I'm very Catholic, and I had a dear friend who was a Jesuit priest who had been silenced by the Jesuits. And he was brilliant and funny, and I really wanted to write this book about him. So that's what the book is about. But it's kind of, specific. I don't know that non-Catholics would be interested. They might, because it has a lot to do with how the world is dividing right now. But people might be interested in that. I wrote a novel that came out in 1996 and then was republished in 2016 called Dark Debts. And that's kind of at the time I was saying it was a 90s version of The Exorcist. So now it's a whatever version of The Exorcist. But it was about demonic possession. And so people who are interested in that kind of thing might like it and can still get it on Amazon. I think as a Kindle. Those are the 2 books I've written.
Okay. And the last question, what is your dream project?
Okay. I have a project I've been wanting to do for 30 years, and it's a mini series about St. Ignatius of Loyola. All the colleges you've heard of named Loyola were named after him. And I've always wanted to do a mini series, and I'm working on it, and we're getting the financing for it. But I wanted to do a mini series about his unsaintly years, because after he was a saint, he was boring. So he had a conversion experience, and he went around and was holy and wrote letters. But before that, he was just a mess. He grew up at court, so he was a page and then a knight, and he was madly in love with the princess who was literally locked in a tower. And he just got into trouble everywhere and had sword fights with husbands of the women he was sleeping with. And so it's Game of Thrones without the dragons. So we've been trying to. I have a partner. We've been trying to get the funding for that, and we are 2/3 of the way. So maybe this year.
Are you, filmmaking has changed so much now with streaming, and it's more independent productions. So in terms of your funding, are you going through like any Kickstarters or GoFundMes?
No, we have a financier who is really good, and he has been selling the people on it. The numbers are really good because it takes place in the Basque Country of Spain, and they recently passed incentives that will give an investor back 75% of what they invest.
Wow.
So that makes it really attractive to people. So we're hoping that's going to fall together this year.
All right. Well, we wish you a lot of luck with that, and future success with your books.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we thank you so much again. We're so happy that we got to speak to you about your wonderful career experience and your days on Moonlighting.
Thank you. Thanks. I enjoyed it. All right. Thanks, guys. See you later.
Okay.